So hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unpacking Possibility. I'm your host, Tracy Stein, as always. I'm so happy to be here with you. Today, my guest is going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's animals and your pets and how we can relate better to them and understand them and ourselves even better than we do now. So Denise Mange is a certified dog trainer. She's an animal communicator, pet numerologist, and founder of Pet Prana. Her mindful approach to pet training combines traditional training with energetic considerations of pet guardianship. Denise has been featured in publications and media outlets worldwide, cementing her reputation as a pioneer in the field of mindful pet parenting. And what could be better than that? Her new book, Translating Your Pet's Behavior, A Mindful Approach to Dog Training, is a #1 bestseller in its category on Amazon. How great is that? So without further ado, Denise, welcome.
So much for having me on the show and for, opening up the topics of mindfulness and our animal companions. How they help us just kind of expand and grow in our lives.
It's such an important topic. Most people who know anything about me or who have ever listened to this show know that animals are primary for me. And I'm just owning it. They've always been such a huge part of my life. And I know a lot of the people who listen to this show get that. They love animals as well. My thing is, I feel like we could all be better pet parents. And a lot of people, I think a lot of people don't realize that it's important for us to be empathically attuned. I'm using my psychology language here, but empathically attuned to our animals rather than just having them be pleasing little adorable objects.
Yeah, no, I love that perspective. And, our animal companions are experts at helping us find abilities and just, expand as humans, especially because we are more empathically attuned to them. Right. As pet parents, we tend to be very, dialed into the energy, the emotions of those around us. And for a lot of us, human relationships might be a little bit more difficult, right? Because there's different motivations, underlying behaviors. So, in my estimation, my experience, our animal companions are some of the most intimate and honest relationships in our lives because we can be truly vulnerable and open. And when we have that openness and vulnerability, it's a lot easier to tap into their energy and understand how their energy actually reflects our own emotions, our mindsets, our habits, and even our will.
100%. And there are so many questions and thoughts going through my mind as you say that. And I was thinking about, just even the range of good pet parenting. I think for most of us, there are times when we have been not as attuned as we ideally could be. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, the importance of that, how we can better achieve that, why we should, and what we might learn.
One thing that I've learned from our animal companions, especially in terms of their behavior, is to move away from any language or kind of mental construct of naughtiness. Right. So if we look at their behavior, we don't want to categorize it as they're naughty or they're nice because that's an oversimplification. And I think that same translates into us as parents. So one way to kind of shift the paradigm is rather than thinking of ourselves as good or bad pet parents, because, that brings so much guilt and so much judgment for ourselves. It's more about how can we be more conscious, more mindful pet parents. Right. And so, when we think of that concept of mindfulness, it's really about, keeping in mind the fullness and richness of our lives. And that fullness and the richness of our lives really comes from our different experiences and how we reflect upon those experiences. That's what creates the richness and the fullness. And everything in our world is giving us clues, observations, mirroring back at us what it is we should be observing. I think back to my, summer abroad living in London and, catching the tube. And you always hear the mind the gap, right? And so that notion of minding the gap to figure out what are the pitfalls and the dangers is so relevant to mindfulness because we want to be mindful of that gap in our needs and whether they're met or not. the gap in our perceptions, our experiences, our relationships, whether it's with our pets or, someone else. And when we talk about this gap, I always think back to, and, Colombia, it's funny because I think it shows up in this movie, The Squid and the Whale. There's this wonderful movie, The Squid and the Whale, and it's, features Jesse Eisenberg. And there's this one line that's so poignant. And the father tells his son, the farthest distance in the universe is the distance between what you thought your life was going to be versus how it turned out. And to me, that's such a beautiful sentiment because that truly is the gap. And if we can figure out what is creating that distance, what's creating that gap, then we're able to have a more rich, fulfilled experience. And so for me, it's always been through observation and reflection in every sense of the work. And so that reflection is key when it comes to our pets. When we're trying to be more conscious pet parents, it's really helpful to look at our pets' behavior as understanding that they're reflecting our energy, our mindsets, our habits. So even things like having accidents around the house or on-leash activity, barking on leash, that's a beautiful way to lovingly give us insight into what's going on underneath the hood. Because our energy is so enmeshed with our pets that if we're not shifting our energy, it's very difficult to shift our pets' behavior. So when we talk about being the best pet parents we can be, it's really about how mindful, attuned, conscientious we can be about not only observing their behavior, but making a correlation to what's going on in our lives more broadly.
I love that you are saying that, and you're probably seeing a bunch of thought balloons above my head as you're talking, because I'm thinking just like, and even talking to my own patients or friends or, look at my, different chapters in my own life. There are people who have dogs that are super anxious, but when you talk to the person is very socially anxious or just anxious in general. It's not to blame anyone, but it's hard to have a calm pet when we can't become ourselves. And I think a lot of times people don't go that extra step because it's something we're not trained to do. I'm not sure if you're aware, but I had a pet communicator on this podcast a while back, Anna Cloca, who's also wonderful. And recently, this is a little bit of an anecdote, but so our dog Loretta passed away about 2 months ago now, and one of our cats, and the cat I least suspected would be doing this, started peeing. Never had done this before, and it was like the great mystery to solve. And I'm laughing because it was Cow Cat. For anyone who's seen a picture of my pets on social media, and he's like, I'm like, I never think he's doing anything wrong. I'm accused of favoritism, but he was peeing in my husband's office and among other places. And Anna said, is your husband really pissed off about something? And, honestly, he was. And, when I explained this to him, he's a little bit less likely to grasp that immediately, but he said, like, all right, yeah, like I've got to kind of find a way to work with these emotions I've been sitting with for a while about something completely unrelated to our household, but knock wood, no more Cowie peeing incidents.
I love that. And that's such a beautiful example of really observing the behavior that apply to you. And so that's where, after working with, just actually with thousands of clients, I developed a framework that communicates exactly what, with common pet behaviors, on-leash reactivity, separation anxiety, unwanted behaviors like barking, jumping to, barking for attention, guest reactivity, accidents, and they're all beautiful behaviors that point towards different themes and that we can explore. So I love that, your little feline friend got you to think about, where am I pissed off? That's exactly what our animal are here to do. And the beauty of it is you could have tried, changing the litter box or doing all these practical aspects. The behavior would probably not have shifted until that introspective moment of, okay, how is this communicating more broadly in my life is received. So our animal companions are amazing at being very insistent and being the litmus test of, have you truly looked under the hood and figured out what the theme is that we need to address more broadly to shift not only the pet's behavior, but your behavior as a human as well.
I love that we're talking about this today, because two things that seem contradictory, on the surface, but there are two things that I observe a lot of times with people who love their pets, but maybe don't think of this connection as being so intuitive or spiritual on top of emotional, is I think they tend to attribute human intentions through their own lens to their pet's behavior. So it's like, so and so did this because they're being spiteful, right? Or trying to manipulate me, but yet it doesn't work the other way around, where they're feeling like their own emotions are impacting the pet, or they look at the pet as having very almost sophisticated human intention, but then act as though they're not able to also have a sophisticated sense of what's going on in a psychological way. I'm not explaining that very well, but I think
that makes
probably
sense.
what, yeah.
No, I agree. And what I always tell pet parents is, no matter how you want to perceive, personify, add those human emotions to your pets, one thing to remember, it's not personal, but it's always about you. So, your dog had an accident. It's not personal. They're not judging you. They're not passing judgment. But there is something to kind of look into about you. What, where are you storing things energetic with your lives? Are you releasing energy? Is it underlying anxiety? Where else might you be anxious in your life that you're trying to kind of stuff or sweep under the rug? So it's never personal, but it's always about you.
Hard for some people to take feedback generally. So feedback from their pet, I imagine sometimes you have your work cut out for you. I'm wondering if you have an example of something where you were like, yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about, like a specific case, if one comes to mind.
I have a few, but one that comes to mind that really speaks to complexity and their intelligence and how they can connect with us, even beyond, the physical time that they've been with us. There's one example that comes to mind of this dog that I worked with in New York. And he was such a sweet pup, and his partner was so dedicated to him. And I moved to LA. So I was doing a remote session for them dealing with the separation anxiety via Zoom. And so the benefit of that was I was able to kind of, coach the mom. I'm like, okay, put him in his little bed, now walk out the door. And I could see via the computer what he was doing, right? So we were going through all the traditional training exercises. We were doing commands, we gave him medical stimulation, we asked for a stay, we disappeared, that. He was still struggling. Finally, I just kind of got this hit. I'm like, okay, find something that you really value in the room. And so she pulls up this little teddy bear that had been on her bed. And I was like, okay, tell me about this teddy bear. She's like, well, this was from my childhood. It's like the one thing, we moved around a lot. It's the one thing that always. I was like, lovely. With your energy, hold this teddy bear, hold it to your heart, and communicate that to your dog. And so she did. I said, now ask him to watch this teddy bear for you. And she did. And hand it to him. Put it in this little bed. I'm like, okay, now go out the door. And she did. And wouldn't you know, the dog goes straight into his little bed, kind of curls around the teddy bear, and he was able to have a lot more tolerance, right, for her being gone. So she came back. And what kind of unfolded from that was this aha moment where, not only, of course, there's her scent, so it, it makes it more valuable, but we talked about the symbolism of that teddy bear, right? And this dog was a rescue, by the way. She loved him so much. But what we kind of uncovered was this parallel where, as a child, she didn't feel within her family context that she had value unless she was contributing, doing, watching her younger siblings, being helpful, setting the table. She didn't feel she was worthy of love unless it was performative. And so the dog was reflecting the same thing. He didn't know that he was valuable enough for her to return just for him. But if he had a job to do, which is watched out there, he knew she'd come back. And so when she kind of drew that pillow, she's like, oh my God, how could he think that? I love him so much just for being him. He's a treasure. And I said, you know what? Your parents probably felt the exact same way about you. You just don't proceed to do that. And it was a
Oh, wow.
release and a friend. And she's like, you know what? I think, this performative aspect of learning love has been something that I've been in relationship. It was just this moment. And so that was a shift through the pet's behavior and perspective, the energy behind it and the motivation that really shift not only for the dog, but also for.
That's so powerful. Really so powerful. And as you're talking about this work, as you're talking, I'm imagining you having a lot of your own intuitive insights while you're connecting to this person and her dog. Because it seems very intuitive as you're noting what's happening with her and where this goes back to. I want to get a sense, to the extent that you're comfortable, of your journey. When did you notice that you could communicate with animals? When did you know that this was your life path?
So, as so many of us listen, I think, growing up, I was incredibly intuitive. I was very clairvoyant also. And I got to the point when I was about between 6 and 8 that I started seeing people, ghosts in my room. And so, I got freaked out and I shut it all down. We were growing up in the 80s. There wasn't a lot of people to explain this to us, even though I grew up in Brazil, which is, you have a bit more woo-woo kind of energy. I just shut it down because I was completely. So, I went through life. One thing that did help a lot in opening back up to my intuition was by the end of college, or by the end of high school, I was certified in Reiki, hands-on healing. So I understood the chakras. And, I went through life. I went through college. I worked for 10 years in advertising, which in retrospect was actually really helpful because as an account executive, you learn to read a room, right? You walk in and you read the energy of the room. You don't, oh, this is not the time to tell the client that we're $300,000 over budget. Advertising also is all about, symbolism, using shapes, using colors intentionally. When we're creating brand portfolios, creating archetypes, right? What brand matches with which archetype? So energetic kind of an understanding of energy and how it kind of creates identity was always part of what I did. So advertising was actually the perfect work for this. So when I decided I was leaving advertising, I said, okay, what am I going to do? And I've always loved pets, but I never had a traditional pet growing up. And so I was like, if I want to work with pets, I could open a doggy daycare in New York City. We always need those. And I was like, since I've never had a pet, I should probably learn about dog behavior. And so I did a dog training course, and part of it entailed practicum hours. And when I got with the one-on-one with pets and their humans, I was sold. I was like, forget the brick and mortar. This is what I want to do. And as I would work with pets, that ability to kind of read the room really started serving me well. And I kind of fell into an animal communication workshop one weekend, and that opened up a whole new permission to go deeper with intuition and how it kind of played a role in working with our animals. And I think for so many of us who are opening back to our intuition after having it shut down, animals are such a beautiful way to do that because they just tap into our heart and open it up wide. And so as I worked more and more with pets and their humans, my intuition grew because I gave it permission. And I started observing patterns. I got a lot of clients who had on-leash reactivity with their pets in New York City. And I started realizing the commonality that, a lot of these people they lack a sense of grounding. Either they're between jobs, they're between relationships, something's a little off in their home life that they don't feel fully grounded. And then I'd go back to my Reiki training. I was like, that's interesting because that's very first chakra, right? It's all about, themes of safety, security, control. So I was like, I kind of noted that was interesting. And then at another point I had, 1 month I had a bunch of dogs that had, separation anxiety. And so I started realizing that there was a trend in the pet life as well. They were overgivers, they were people pleasers, they kind of subjugate their needs versus others. I was like, that's interesting. Hello, second chakra. It's interesting.
Hmm.
So through working with thousands of clients, I started opening up and realizing there was such a correlation to the framework of the chakras, which also matches up to, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the different motivations driving the energy behind each chakra. And so for me, it was about drawing that parallel. And what I'm passionate about is this philosophy that I created, which I truly think is the new way forward in pet guardianship, which bridges the gap between pet guardianship and dog training with personal development. Just like we've seen with conscious parenting with human children, we're just translating that to our animal companions. So I like to think of this new era of dog training as self-help for pet's sake, right? How can we kind of look internally to help shift the energy of our pets?
I love that. And, it's interesting as you were talking about some of the people who like take care of everybody to their own detriment. I was thinking that, just psychologically, it's very hard to get those people to take care of themselves, even though it's important, even though you become a better caregiver, if that's what you feel is a primary role for you. And doing it for your pet's sake, if you can't do it for your own, that's such a nice way in, and important too for the animal.
I agree. I think that's what our animal companions teach us is that we cannot extend authentically and fully anything to those around us that we can't extend to ourselves. It needs to be that full collaboration. And that's what they teach us so well. And a lot of us, we might acknowledge it, check the box and be like, yeah, I'll deal with that later. We kind of, sweep it under the rug. But if we think it's going to shift our pet's behavior or affect their well-being, we're on it, we're committed, we're doing the work.
Denise, tell me about pet prana. I'm familiar with the term prana. I don't know if everybody is who's listening, but tell me how you arrived at that name and maybe describe a little bit more of what that means to you for people who are listening.
Absolutely. So pet prana, so pet means particularly cherished, right? We have pets with pet projects with teachers' pet. And prana is the energy connected to everything. So the funny thing about that is, I had started my business as Denise Mange doctor, right? Something very, very straightforward and traditional. As my services, my philosophy, my offerings kind of expanded, and I moved to LA and I had to start a new website, new business. I was like, gosh, what am I going to use, right? What is the new kind of bigger arching picture? And so, man, I spent weeks, if not months, toiling, researching, thinking, is it mindful pet? Is it Buddha pet? What is it? And it's so funny because I was kind of focusing on it one day and I got a twinkle off to the side and I heard and I was like, I don't even know what that is. Ignored it, tried a bunch of other things, twinkle, prana. I was like, I still don't know what this is. I looked up prana and I was like, oh, okay, there we go. But the marketer in me goes, I don't know what it is. No one's going to know what it is. Like, how am I even going to, like, that's silly. I'm trying to swish it off and just, disregard it. But it kept coming, and that was the name. Sometimes in life, we have these moments that it's something comes to you. And if you don't pay attention the first time, it will keep nudging you till you pay attention. And so, now I love that name. I can't think of anything I'd rather have represent my business than prana. But it was something I was not familiar with. I don't even think I knew the word prana. So it was definitely something that kind of like entered my field and was a big aha.
That's so great. And I was chuckling to myself a little bit because the twinkle off to the side, I think people who are I think everybody's intuitive potentially, not maybe all the same, like maybe not everybody's going to, be a classical pianist, but, everybody can play chopsticks just about. But I think that twinkle that you're talking about is something that people who've studied intuition development and developed their own get. It's like that thing that I don't know if it's your higher self or your guides and it could be either or both. I don't know, but it does let you know that this is worth paying attention to.
And it's interesting, right? I agree with you fully. I think I'm equal and intuitive. We just understand how we receive messages. And it's funny for me, that twinkle it's not something that happens all the time, But when that happens, and it's maybe been 2 or 3 times, wow, do I pay attention now? Because I'm like, okay, this is important. But as we connect with our animal, as we tap into our passion projects, we might receive information in very different ways. But if we're observers, and to me, that's truly the key, is being observers and listening and really reflecting upon what you're observing. That's what opens up to our intuition. And that's where, I think back even to high school, like I was horrible at math and science, but I always loved literature and especially symbolism, like dissecting a paragraph and really getting into the nitty-gritty. And that to me is intuition, right? If we're able to just kind of zoom in on something and dissect it and create associations, the more we build that intuitive muscle, the more intuition grows. And then we open up, right? So our pets teach us to do that as well, because we attune to their energy to understand how they're feeling, how they're, what they're thinking about in the moment. And then as we attune to them more deeply, we open up to that really beautiful interspecies telepathy. So many of us pet parents, we just know what our pets think. We might not give ourselves credit. You might think we're making it up, but there is a telepathic exchange with our animal that then helps us become more intuitive and telepathic with other energies, that surround us in our lives.
Absolutely. You're making me think of the work of Rupert Sheldrake, which I'm sure you knew, but I don't know if everybody knows, but British biologist who has, among other things, the book Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home. And it's uncanny, and yet it is so natural for them to know what we're thinking, even when we're not physically present. And that's something that I think either sounds too far out or freaks people out. But I really like that, what you're talking about in your book and in general is about, challenging some of the very concrete assumptions we've had about our relationship with animals, what they pick up, how we are connected, and how to use that information to be better parents to them, and also to continue healing and growing ourselves.
And I think it's really important because, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all aspire to be self-actualized. We all aspire to be the best people we can be. But until we feel safe and grounded, that we have, emotional connection, maybe a sense of purpose, until we're able to kind of build upon each basic to, meet a higher one, we can't be self-actualized. I would argue that our pets have those same hierarchy of needs. They need to feel safe, they need mental engagement, but they also want that energetic connection. And I do believe that they come to us, their self-actualization takes the form of when they're able to successfully teach us different lessons in our lives. So when we talk about being the best pet parent we can be, it goes so far beyond that. They help us step into new careers, new perspectives on ourselves, new relationships, new outlooks in life. And when they're able to do that, they become self-actualized as well. And that's the beauty of it, right? Because sometimes when people hear this philosophy, they say, oh man, well, I feel really guilty then. My anxiety is doing this to my pet. I'm like, no. Think of yourself as being in a classroom and you all read the same book. And instead of doing individual book reports, you're doing a group project. You're both working on this together. So the partnership goes so deep.
So beautiful. And it's funny, it's both a sophisticated and unique approach, but it's also so approachable. And I think your examples are so great because they do make these concepts, which are new for a lot of people, very digestible, very understandable. Everybody can relate to that example.
And action, right? I think that's why it was so important to create this book and this resource because, dog training has come a long way. We moved away from dominance, based dog training. It's the positive reinforcement. The dog training category has done a great job kind of understanding that our animal needs mental stimulation. They have toys, they have puzzles. We all know we need to take our dogs on adventures. That's kind of where it's plateaued, right? That what we're kind of broaching now is the energetic connection. The important to hit that, body, mind, spirit trifecta. And so there've been a lot of resources out there that talk about dog training, positive reinforcement, but they still view our behavior separate from our pets. And then there's a lot of esoteric books that talk about our soul contracts with our pets, messages from our pets, roles that they can play in our lives. But there's nothing that brings both together. And that's what I truly believe is the new era of guardianship, which is a mindful approach to dog training, where not only are we talking about their roles in our lives and our personal development, but we have very practical indications of what area of personal development to focus on and the practical exercises, whether it's through dog training, ways to connect, considerations. We give practical ways to actually reflect and act upon those insights.
So important. Denise, in your book, so if you were to give people like a verbal kind of overview, what are the most important things you think people will take away from your book, or the things that you most want people to pay attention to?
Beautiful. One is that there's a correlation between partnership and personal development. Two, that our pets are reviewers. And so they help us pay closer attention to not only their behavior, but our surroundings, so that we can start translating their messages for ourselves. And the third is kind of this concept. It's very empowering. It's it might feel trite, but, coming from an advertising background, I love a good pun. It's the concept of Nah-Mutt-Stay, like Muttstay. And we know that Nah-Mutt-Stay, as a yoga term, talks about the light in me recognizes the light in you. Our pets do that as well. They invite us to see our light within them and vice versa. So we have that connection. We see
Beautiful.
We see that potential.
Beautiful. So true. Sorry, Zelda is hearing a delivery person most likely pulling into my gravel driveway. It's funny because sometimes, so I'm going to use Zelda as an example. I'll probably pop a little photo of her in the YouTube version of her interview. But Zelda is a very psychic dog, and I've said that for a long time. And sometimes, like, she's very doggy dog, whereas, some of my other dogs have been very kind of person-like. And I have to remember that just like people, like we all have something beautiful to offer. But I'm always kind of surprised at, like definitely she heard somebody pull in the driveway, which, is understandable. We might expect that. But she's uncannily able to know sometimes when somebody is coming, even if we haven't mentioned it, even if they're coming at an unusual time. I'm going to say she gives us like the 5 to 10 minute warning usually. Her behavior and her communications are very different, like prior to, in that kind of window before something happens. Even before she sees her dog friends, that she has best friends in the neighborhood.
So great. And our pets are so intuitive. So what I did is I pulled in Zelda's just very quickly.
Thank you.
Because I think numerology is always really fun to understand our pets' tendencies and motivations. And so Zelda vibrates at a 21 over 3. So 3 is the overall vibration. So 3, if we think back to themes of, the third chakra, it's about stepping into our power, having that empowerment. It also has to do with how creative are we? Are we putting our energy out into the world? Are we finding new ways and frameworks of doing things? So 3 also is, with that yellow color of the third chakra, it's also very fiery, right? It's got kind of a little bit of energy. So what I would say with Zelda, if I were doing some training with her, I'd say, okay, we know she's fiery. We know she has no, there's no she won't stop because it's not polite to do something. She's going to do whatever Zelda's going to do. So what we need to do is get creative with her to figure out, to give her a job to do, to make her feel empowered when we hear something new approaching the home. So whether it's, going to her bed and tossing a treat there or teaching her something else, we want to get creative with a protocol so she feels empowered rather than just choosing to bark because she doesn't have a different protocol.
That is so helpful. And the next thing I was going to ask you about was the numerology. I'm also laughing to myself because not laughing to myself, but I'm thinking, oh, how uncanny. Because so many of those things happen where I'm like, it's uncanny, but maybe it isn't, right? Because the universe, this is how it works. I feel like. But Zelda, when you said the third chakra yellow, I'm thinking also like she's someone who has struggled with feeling secure and her own kind of sense of self and her place in the family and her place in the world. She's had some trauma. And I think that she's been really disempowered earlier on. And I mean, I know she has been. And so it's so interesting that that is, what you connected to her name and her numerology. And we actually gave her this name that she had a different name before we had her. And we're her third home at least. So it's been a bit of a journey. But I think what you're saying is so spot on and so helpful. It does resonate.
Yeah, and it's so sweet. So a lot of times our animal communities, they want to be a helpful part of our path, right? And if left to their own devices, they're going to help the only way they know. And oftentimes that's barking or jumping off at us or, clearing the energy of our space and accidents, because that's the only way they know. So the more we can empower them, give them jobs to do, let them know they're doing well, that helps build their confidence, but it also builds our own, right? That sense of, you know what, this isn't something that's completely out of control. And that every time I'm on Zoom, we're going to have is she going to bark? Is she not? We know that if she barks, I love a dog who gives a good bark or two, just to kind of set the stage. But then we give her something else to do, and it just helps us feel more empowered. It helps them feel empowered and knows their role.
That is so spot on and so important. I'm not a numerologist, but I have, read books previously and, I like to do my own little dabbling. I'm, not an expert by any means, but I know enough to get myself in trouble, or I know, I know enough to have a sense of what you're talking about. I was curious before you came on. So we actually do know when Zelda was born, and, we have her name, and all of those things have numerical vibrations, associations. And I know I have a sense of how you arrived at that number for her, but I think a lot of people don't. And a lot of people obviously don't necessarily know when their pets were born. Can you describe your approach to numerology for animals?
I love that you say you know enough to be dangerous. I say that all the time too. So when it comes to numerology, I dabble as well. I use it to my benefit. I don't hold myself to the constraints of the science. Some people are very intense about numerology. The way it kind of came into my world is, I was doing, dog training one-on-one with pets and their humans. And I started, as I mentioned before, I noticed omniture activity was like so many cases of that. And there's a commonality with pet parents. And so there was 1 month where I was getting all these requests for separation anxiety, and the dog's name was consistently Leo. And I was like, that is so bizarre. Let me just kind of file that away. And I was working in New York City, and I remember I had an hour between appointments. It was going to be right next door. It was raining. So I ducked into a spiritual bookstore just because it was convenient. It looked really nice and cozy. Went in there, out of nowhere, this woman. And I swear she was otherworldly. She was so beautiful, tall, long black hair, wearing all black. Comes to me with a book on numerology and says, you need this. And I was like, well, okay, interesting. So in that hour, I looked up the numerology of Leo. And so Leo holds a vibration of 5. And 5 can be like the freedom seeker, the adventurer. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. I always assumed separation anxiety was more about the codependency. But in this case, it's more about they have FOMO. They have fear of missing out. They want to go on the adventure with you. So the way that I approach the separation anxiety in those pets was very different from the way I would approach separation anxiety from a pet that their name vibrates at 2 or 4, which is more routine and relationship based. And so from there, I started using numerology. And so in numerology, every letter of the alphabet is assigned a letter or a number 1 through 9. And you just add them up, and whatever that overall vibration is the energy. For me, I'm more interested. Yes, it's good to know the overall vibration of the name, but what letters are side by side? Like when I see a 6 and a side by side, and to me, that's the yin and yang symbol. They're very complete within themselves. They don't see. Or when I see 95 side by side, that's a healer for me. It's stepping into the field, where you're able to just kind of understand what's needed with the energy, create that feeling. Whereas a 59, I call it an empathic healer. They have to kind of filter the energy through themselves like a Brita and put out higher vibrations. So there's like these different tendencies that I've kind of amassed by just playing with numerology. So for me, I don't need a birth date or anything very specific. I don't necessarily use people's names on their birth certificate. What I do is I use the name that the client gave me, like, in the booking. I'll look at the pet's name, look the numerology on the human's name and the pet's name, and see where their numbers align, what numbers kind of miss out, because that gives me an indication of not only each individual's motivation and tendencies, but also the different roles that they fill, the gaps that they fill in each other's lives.
So interesting. Now, do you look at the pet's first name and last name or just the first name?
Usually just do the first name. And
Okay.
typically, if they are a rescue, we'll just use the name that you chose, because that's the energy that you're, whatever we're using on a daily basis is the energy I take that. And then, of course, there's other side to it where, as humans, sometimes we have a lot of names. We have a professional name, we have our personal name, we have this, that. So that in of itself is interesting to note as well, because those pet parents tend to have a lot of fleeting energy too. So there's a lot of, there isn't a very stable energy there. So sometimes the pet brings that stability, or sometimes they're kind of mirroring it with their energy being scattered as well.
So interesting. In your book, will people learn how to do pet numerology, or tell me about that.
So I have a whole course about numerology. So that is something separate. But what we do in this book is, the idea is we're trying to empower pet parents to be able to look at their pet's behavior and then go deeper. So, there's 4 questions that I think, regardless pet should ask themselves. If their pet is barking or having a behavior that's, triggering them or causing them to something they want to shift, right? You always want to feel into that behavior, figure out where it kind of hits in your body, and emotion associated with it. So if my dog's barking, I might say, okay, I feel that in my body, my throat kind of constricts a little bit, right? Then you're going to ask yourself, where else in your life have you felt that way, right? And so I might think back to, Tuesday at work, I was in that meeting and I said something and everybody ignored me. And the guy next to me said the exact same thing. And everybody's like, bravo, you figured it out, solved. Man, my throat felt tight again. I just feel like I'm never heard. So we go into that, okay, let's really pinpoint what is that belief. And indeed, it might be, I'm never heard. No one ever listens to me. So we want to think back to, what else does that remind you? Like, when was the first time you felt that way? Might have been in childhood, something else might pop up. But what we want to do in those moments, then we can say, if we're ready to change that story, what's a new mindset you can adopt? And so I might say, you know what? Okay, maybe what I need to start leaning into is that when I speak and I mean it, the right people receive it. When I'm being authentic, when I have a message, the people who are meant to hear it go out. And so then next time when my animal companion is barking, I can already get into that mindset of, oh, okay, when I speak and it's authentic, I'm heard. So that's going to change my energy from being like, Zelda, 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 to Zelda. All right, little one, thank you. Right. So it already shifts the mindset with which I'm approaching my training, which will help me next time at work. If I'm going to say something, I'm able to kind of channel that energy. So within this book, I have jumping off points of mindsets to kind of look at different themes to look at in your life, McRobbie, for pets having particular behaviors. But ultimately, what I want to take away is this little exercise of okay, my pet's behaving a certain way. Let me take a step back. Where's that pattern in my life more broadly? What do I need to change to be more empowered around this theme? And let me put it into practice.
Yeah, that's so helpful. Definitely. And I think it will take people time to kind of shift into the mindset of continually asking and looking. And it's funny because you're talking about barking. I would imagine that is one of the more common reasons why people come and see you and seek you out. And it's funny, years ago, and I'm gonna disclose, like, I tend to think I am a better than average pet parent because I feel very attuned to them. And yet, obviously, I'm a person, imperfect, and will always have things to work on. And it's funny, my relationship with Zelda has taught me about myself and about her. But, Zelda's a barker. And I remember, and it's normal, I think, to have that feeling of like, just stop barking, because it increases our anxiety, especially if we're like trying to do something. We're on the phone or we're talking to somebody online or we have to go and do something or it's just going through our brains. And, I remember years ago, a friend who is also an incredible animal communicator, Shalini Bosby, said, like, dogs bark, 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 like they're telling you they want you to listen. And it's like, it's interesting because so often when they start doing that, we don't listen. And how important it is for us to all just be better listeners, period. And how does that change the energy of that interaction with your pet, your dog? And how does it change it for them? Like, oh, like you're hearing me.
Absolutely. And I love that analogy. And barking is definitely one of those things, especially as we have online businesses, we're trying to record something and be really polished. And then it's like, come on. So a lot of the times also the barking reminds us of being authentic in the moment. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to voice our frustration. And whereas in the past, especially as a parent, maybe we didn't feel it was okay or safe to voice frustration with someone or disappointment in someone. Our pets are teaching us it's okay to be frustrated, voice it. It doesn't mean we're going to be angry with them all the time, but
hopefully not.
It's okay, right? It's okay to be frustrated. It's all right to have moments where you're like, come on, man. Like, we're just trying to get through this. Because those are moments that we show compassion to ourselves. And we allow ourselves, we give ourselves permission not to filter ourselves. And that comes with finding our authentic voice, right? It's not about avoiding conflict. Having that authentic voice is being able to speak in, as experiences come up, you're able to express them. You're able to speak a whole gamut of emotions and, have a gamut of interactions and not feel like you have to filter yourself because, man, it's exhausting to filter ourselves. And we do that a lot. And just as we allow that for ourselves, we allow our pets to also have good days and bad days, right? We allow them to voice their frustration too. And we can meet them in that spot. Zelda, I know it feels frustrating because trucks come out of nowhere. I hear you, friend. But let's create a new business, right? So unless we meet our pets where they are energetically and acknowledge it first, it's very hard to create shifts after. Same for us. If we don't meet ourselves where we are energetically, emotionally first, it's not fair to ask ourselves to change. We need to validate, understand that it's okay to feel that way.
And I'm wondering, I know you were mentioning mindfulness, earlier in our conversation. Do you do formal mindfulness training with your pet parents who come to you, or is it a thread that runs through kind of everything that you're doing with them and encouraging them to do with their animals?
For me, it's truly a thread that runs through it all, right? It can be as simple as, working with more traditional training clients who maybe aren't open to, crystals, numerology, that kind of thing. It can be as simple as be the energy you want to see, right? When we're working with our animal clients and we're frustrated, as humans, we try to bargain with them, come on, stop barking, come on, everything's fine. Unless my energy and body language reflects that everything's fine and I'm cool, calm, and collected, they're not going to be cool, calm. So that aspect of mindfulness can be as simple as be the energy you want to see. And reminding everybody of energetic coherence. If I tell my dog one thing, but my energy and the narrative in my head is going in a completely different direction, they're always going to trust the energy, not my words. So making sure that when I'm asking something of my pet, I'm really embodying it, I'm feeling it, confident. So that's a very kind of 101 way to talk about mindfulness. And then it goes all the way to working with clients with, how our pets help us open up to our intuition, how they help us explore different realms, dimensions, and gifts and abilities, all the way to, mindfulness, learning from our pets how to be authentic in our business, helping people market and build their brand and create branding that's authentic to them. Because when we step into our purpose work and we create these beautiful brands and we put our offerings out into the world, our pets benefit from that. So they want to partner with us in that. So everything I do has a thread of mindfulness, and it can dial up or down depending on the guest.
So true. And again, I really like what you're saying about having what you say, whether it's to your pet or probably anyone, and to yourself, being congruent with what you're actually feeling. And in order to do that, you actually have to be aware.
Exactly. And they keep us honest, right? If we're not, they'll let us know. And so it is definitely a work in progress, but it helps us calibrate more so that when we're in other relationships where seemingly it might be bigger stakes, we might be asking for a promotion, we might be pitching an idea at work, we are aware of whether or not we're energetically congruent, and we can be like, "Ooh, okay, now gotta take a moment, gotta take that deep breath, gotta center in, and now my pitch is a lot more authoritative and effective."
And everything you're saying, you mentioned conscious parenting a while back in our interview, which has really become so important and so much in the common vernacular. And everything you're saying about working with animals and relating to animals really does hold true for how people are with their children. And I think people, again, benefit from being more conscious in how they parent, again, whether it's a human or whether it's an animal, and how they parent themselves as well.
Beautifully said. That's absolutely right. Whether it's, a lot of people I work with, the pets are their first children, right? So they kind of work through, especially with couples, they work through their parenting styles. They work through their own kind of perceptions. They also work through how they were parented. When you become a parent, there's that opportunity to go back and be like, man, I wish I'd been parented this way or that way. So you're re-parentifying yourself, if that's even a word, in some way, shape, or form. Then it translates to if they actually do have kids. Some don't. Some only have, little fur babies. But it applies to every aspect of your life, and especially parenting yourself, because that's the ultimate goal, right? Is to be able to go back and be as compassionate to yourself as you are to others. And that's the true lesson and gift that they give us, because a lot of us, we're very harsh with ourselves. We're very loving to those around us, but we're really difficult and tough on ourselves. And our pets remind us to really kind of give that same level of love, compassion, and patience that we share with them to ourselves. And if we don't, they're going to let us know, right? We talked earlier about sometimes, it takes a while for new mindsets to set in. The beauty of working with our animal companions is training is all about repetition. So if we know that typically it takes about 30 days for a new habit to set in, to set in, we know that we're going to be working with our pets every day for those 30 days. So they help create that space, that regular routine for us to not only acknowledge it shifts into place, but actually solidify it through repetition.
Definitely. Denise, I will put your link to your book and your website in the show notes. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I did not yet? Or anything you feel like it's really important that we bring into our conversation today that we haven't gotten to yet?
Yeah, I would say that although we focus a lot on dogs today, this philosophy of premise works for any pet in our lives, whether it's fish, dogs, cats, birds, snakes, whatever it may be. And it also extends beyond, right? The most important takeaway from today's show is that our animal companions are helping us observe. They're bringing clues on what we're ready to shift and make better in our lives. And that's not only one-on-one with our animals that, live at home with us, our domesticated animals, but we can get that same benefit from animals in the wild. Maybe there's a squirrel that you saw as you're walking to work. That might be, a message for you about make sure you're investing in your future, right? Put those nuts away. So as we connect and we observe the different animals in our lives and we start ascribing a significance or a symbolism to them, then when they show up, we can better interpret those messages. So all the animals in our lives are really working together to help us be more mindful, more reflective, more introspective, and to help us understand how we can kind of take that next step of personal development.
I love that you're saying that about wild animals. I'm thinking of like Stephen Farmer's books about, animal symbolism, and I found it to be so true. Just a crazy aside, I had this period where I kept seeing turkey vultures, and again, coming like closer, like within like 15 feet of me and closer than that, which doesn't typically happen. Groups of them in the sky around a time when it kind of made sense once I looked it up. But, I was with, people I hadn't met before this weekend, and this one woman, who lives in Oregon was talking about having a herd of elk that routinely came to her yard, and what that might mean for her. And I was like, holy cow, I hadn't even thought about that. But absolutely, birds, fish, I had a praying mantis coming for a while and then have not seen that in a year and a half. But I think it meant something specific that was very relevant to what I was dealing with at that time. And I feel like that was kind of a gift from the universe and something to make me pay attention to.
Yeah, and it's all about that observation. Not to get too kind of, esoteric story.
This is the place. Or a place.
Single culture as a paradise lost story. And in these paradise lost stories, just like the garden, our animal companions were right next to us. We had open lines of communication with them, and they're guiding us every step of the way. It was Snake who, allegedly came through and was like, here, let's take the next step in personal development. I think Snake gets a bad rap. I think that, in that moment, it was a guidance towards kind of a next step. But in every historical context, in every culture, animals have always been guiding us, and they've been, walking right beside us, if not leading us in our journey. Our Native American, heritage, they have such beautiful traditions of looking at animals, animal symbolism, animal magic. A lot of times we tend to think, wow, we're really learning something about animals and their roles in our lives. Actually, we're just remembering the role that they've played in our lives so beautifully that, sometimes we forgot as, life got more complicated, more technologically refined, but they've always been there. So let's lean into them. Let's learn from them. Let's observe them. Because if they're drawing our attention to something, there's a message there. And it just helps us open up our intuition to bigger, broader gifts, messages, connections out there. It's really a beautiful first step in partnership.
Beautifully said. So Denise, tell people where they can find your new book, your best-selling book. Congratulations.
Thank you. It was a labor of love, I'll tell you. It is available on Amazon. And you can also find it on my website at petprana.com.
Okay, petprana.com. Denise Mange, thank you so much for being here today. I learned a lot. This was terrific. And I always love connecting with people who love animals as much as I do. If you've enjoyed the episode, and I know you did, please remember to like, share, follow, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. And of course, as always, until next time, be well.